And welcome to the AFL High Performance Podcast. Today, I'll be discussing how strength and conditioning coaches and why strength and conditioning coaches need to develop and have a clear understanding on their technical model when it comes to running efficiency, capacity, both in acceleration, max velocity, and change of direction, accel, decel. So we'll start with why you need one. And this has been a recent discovery from some mentors of myself over the last few years, particularly working in the rehab space. If you don't have a technical model, you can get caught up in prescribing drills, both from a mobility, strength, speed, as well as movement efficiency point of view, for the sake of it and not purposeful. So if you have that technical model, i.e. you've got a clear coaching eye, you're looking for specific areas that you value and you know are really important when it comes to the acceleration. That might be shin angle, torso angle, are they parallel? What's our ankle stiffness like? What's the rotation like? Through looking at the posterior through the trunk, shoulders, and the pelvis, anterior and posterior pelvic tilt. Similar with max velocity, what's our shin angle like? What's our touch distance? So when our foot's in the ground relative to under our center of mass, under our hips. What's going on both in the transverse plane with our rotation, what's going on with our sagittal plane, in our thigh gap on touchdown, as well as looking at our backside mechanics and frontside mechanics. Are we ripping our foot down underneath the hip, or are we overstriding? So there's some key areas that you can focus on and not get not getting caught up too much in the perhaps arms, head position. We're just sort of looking at what's going on below the belly button. And then if we take care of that, having good understanding that's going to generally put the rest of the body in a good spot. So biomechanics is critical. It's not everything, particularly with athletes can move really efficiently, but they'll still be in pain. So we need to also understand that it's not everything, but it is a big piece of the puzzle when working on efficiency, ultimately helping athletes run faster and reducing the risk of injury, but also being more economical, using less energy to get from A to B throughout endurance-based sports like AFL. The key research that has been most pivotal for myself has been Chris Brummer's S-Mass, which is getting a lot of popularity recently. He's done a great job using kilogram of key positions of a running cycle, which I'll show a demonstration of that shortly. Tom DeSantos was also involved in that paper, as well as the S-Mass, which is more looking at lateral speed, really important for not only agility, but also injuries like ACL. And then James Wild, who we recently had on the podcast. All these guys will be on the podcast. Tom DeSanto, James Wild. Be great to get Chris Brummer on soon regarding quadrants. And there's a lot of strong belief out there that the issue with kinograms is it's an isolated photo on one particular position of one particular run, and there's a lot of variation in how an athlete moves from day to day, the surface that they're on, the context of the run, and so forth. However, through James Ross research with rugby athletes over a long period of time, it showed that athletes bias the way they move, i.e. are they more air-based, elastic-based athletes? Are they more ground-based, your sort of concentric dominant-based athletes? Do they get from A to B with short ground contacts, or is it more longer ground contact time? Generally speaking, that without intervention, so not looking to coach it or prescribe specifically to change the way they move on his quadrant, they tend to on a given day that you test, they tend to stay in the same quadrant. That's quite consistent. So that gives us confidence that kinograms do have a place, particularly if you don't have a big budget and you don't and you just want to simply use your phone. Quite practical. You can show athletes how they're moving with that video, and then cut up using screenshots of specific landmarks and look at the positions that the athletes are hitting, whether you're looking at max velocity, their acceleration, or their deceleration ability. So, for example, like a 0 to 10 meter for acceleration, looking at their touchdown, looking at their mid stance and their toe off. You do the same for a sprint, but you might do a flying effort, so 20-meter build, and then record from 20 to the 40-meter mark when they're at good speed. or deceleration, like doing a 5 meter acceleration, 10 meter back, 5 meter turn, for example. So you're looking at their ability to be able to turn at 180 degrees and filming that, both planting off their left as well as planting off their right, and comparing between the two sides. So that's a good illustration that we can look at. It's not going to be everything. You might want to also add in like a cutting variation, which Tim McGrath has made quite famous with Pitch Ready for ACL assessment, looking at athletes' ability to cut 30 degrees reactive in a reactive sense, so 20-meter sprint, and then cutting to the left or right, depending on which way the person chooses, the coach chooses. So we can use all that to create some good guide on how that athlete's moving, and then ultimately using that kinematics as well as understanding their kinetic testing. So looking at their counter movement jump, how much force they can produce at a quick rate. So their power relative to their body weight, what's their strength with their 1 rep maxes in squat, deadlift, even upper body as well, bench press, chin up. Looking at their screening data, so their mobility, things like knee to wall, hip internal rotation, external rotation. Looking at drop jumps, their reactive strength. So drop jumps on the plates, looking at their contact time and how high they're jumping off a 40-centimeter box and potentially unilateral as well, single leg 30-centimeter box. Max velocity, what's their top speed, which typically most clubs will have GPS these days, so you can look at that and how that changes over time. And as well, injury history. So you might have a syndesmosis injury, and the athlete had tightrope, and that's affecting, their opposite hip, could be affecting their groin. So it could be causing some pain further up the chain, maybe some perhaps knee issues. But also they could be on their testing, their symmetry is off. So their performance their capacity is really high, but when you're looking at a bit of a deeper dive in the Vold app, you can look at their symmetry, and they're actually generating a lot more force on the non-injured ankle. So injuries, particularly with operation, those traumatic injuries can cause significant impact in how athletes produce force and ultimately how they move. So we want to get that information into account, and then from that, the way we're looking at their kinematics, the way they move through those kinograms, or using view motion if you have the luxury to have a budget in place and get an understanding using AI. How do they move? Look at the quadrants, look at the research of the SMAS, rate them through that SMAS, which I'll show. And I'm happy to provide Chris Brummer's research as well. Just hit me up on socials. But this is, if you're watching on YouTube, this gives you a good framework which will help develop your coach's eye as well. So hopefully you can see that nice and easy here on YouTube channel. So this is the SMAS, the sprint assessment score, and these are the different AMAS. So he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different areas to look for in max velocity. Excessive trunk rotation, we'll get some points against. Excessive hip extension, so out the back, they're over pushing. Heel above calf in anterior pelvic tilt, so that would typically cause them to be, their backside mechanics are too dominant. Then we've got excessive thigh separation with our late swing phase, excessive thigh separation and forward lean. So we're not, the touchdown distance isn't underneath their hip, which is also another one. Touchdown, they're closely linked. The foot is too far in front of their center of mass, casting out. Excessive heel strike and anterior pelvic tilt, which we know is going to create extra braking forces and really putting our athletes at high risk for hamstring strains, particularly bicep fem short head. And then out of mid-stance vertical collapse at knee and ankle, which you might want to look at the posterior view as well with that to see how much of sort of valgus position we're getting in pronation of the ankle. So there's some key markers there. And if you haven't got a technical model, you could easily use Chris Brummer's research, which has collated a lot of the current day research, and this has been used in biomechanics over a long period of time. He's put it together and put it in a good report. You can also use the number system that he's put together to value how that athlete is moving, which is this system here. So effectively, athletes can get up to 12 points on a given one of those positions they can get. 12 would be poorly rated, extremely poor. And if they're really efficient, they'll will get very little points. So 0 would be perfect score. And obviously, the lower score you have, the less kinematics has in terms of a risk factor for injury, but also for you, the more efficient you're moving, the more you're able to maximize your speed, and also the use across a long period of game, particularly games like AFL that go for a long period of time. So the more efficient, less energy you use to get from A to B. I mentioned as well the CMAS. So Tom DeSantos has also built a good framework to help with your lateral speed, and he's given some good guide on what to work on if you're seeing things like limited knee flexion, or you're seeing the trunk is leaning back, or there's too much sway in the trunk from a posterior view, and trunk rotation. And like I mentioned, that can be of cause due to lack of ankle stiffness, perhaps from a past injury. Foot might not be in neutral, so they could have that duck foot, everted position, what to work on with, which we know has put them at high risk for ACL. Hip and knee, so that valgus position, what to work on, and then wide lateral leg plant distance as well. So he's listed all the risk factors in lateral move, both from a cutting perspective, and what to work on if you're seeing that in your coaching. And then last screenshot to share is this one here, which is also a point system that Tom's put together for the cutting movement assessment score, the CMAS, and it's similar to Chris's in that it's yes, if you're seeing that default, like lateral leg plant distance is too wide, they'll get 2 points. If it's moderate, it's 1, and if it's narrow, they get 0. So if it's quite close to their hip, it's 0. So you can rank that and then ultimately look at areas that you need to focus on with that athlete. From there, you can also create a bucket with a squad. So obviously with rehab, it's very individualized and you customize the program, and that's easy to do when you're just working with 1 or 5 athletes. But when you've got a large group of 30 to 40 athletes, the next best thing you can do is bucket them. So if you conduct a test in the off-season, pre-season, get their CMAS score, get their SMAS score, conduct your basic strength and power assessments, diagnostics with using force plates and 1RM testing. Then we can start to put athletes in groups for how they move, but also what areas they need to focus on from their kinetics point of view. So you'll have guys that are really strong, but they need to work on their rate of force development. So they might go into a power group. You might have athletes that have got the strength and the power, but their efficiency is lacking. So you're going to get some extra drilling exposures to them across the week. And then within that, there could be some specific areas of focus for certain groups. So within that movement efficiency group, it might be athletes that are struggling with that touchdown distances too far out in front of their center of mass, and perhaps there's a big thigh gap. So for those athletes, they might be working on wicket sprints, for example, to work on shorter ground contact times and work on that swing leg ripping through a lot faster. So we can start to have a more of a purposeful approach with our athlete development, with our robustness work with our athletes. In my experience, it's been really helpful as well, just to simply show the athletes the vision and coach them, educate them through the vision on areas that they can improve, not necessarily what they're doing poorly, but what's going well and what are areas that they can focus on to improve, and why they're doing a certain drill, what they're going to get from it. And naturally, athletes tend to coach themselves quite well once they see the vision and what the focus is. When you're creating change, think about microdosing, particularly if you're listening to this in season, you want to make change, use the pre-training window from an efficiency point of view. So do some drills that are specific to, it's going to help with your mechanics. If your power is lacking, we know that power potentiates training, so it has low cost from a fatigue point of view, and it should help your ability to retain information in the meetings, but also train at a high intensity. So you can add in some explosive work pre-training. It might only take 15 minutes, but it'll help move the needle for your ability to project across the ground. And then for those athletes that aren't moving as efficiently as possible, working with the coach is probably the most important thing, and getting that regular feedback. And then what we measure, we tend to improve. So looking at doing these screens every few weeks, so you can, if you're using the kilograms, they're quite easy to use. Really important and final take on all this. If we are doing kilograms, we don't want to just have an isolated approach and look at that frame, understanding that movement is in synergy, and there's a lot that go into how an athlete will get into that certain position. For example, if we're looking at that max velocity, how they accelerate and how they move towards that max velocity posture will be a significant influence. So when you are filming it and you're showing the athlete, don't just talk about that isolated frame, talk about how they got there in the first place. What is the cause, not the effect, for example. So I think that's really important. Actually, Alec Butfield, biomechanist, came on recently from the LA Crows, talked about that from a skill development point of view, but also with kicking. But you could also apply the same approach when it comes to movement efficiency as well. Recently, like the course I'm doing with Jonas, we talked about that on a recent Zoom catch up we had with him, that and that's why he loves using view motion, because it takes into account every step throughout the test, not just one particular step in that position. So everything influences, one step influences the next step. Our swing leg is influencing our stance leg, and it's all in motion, and it's all influencing each other, and the synergy of it all was really, really important. And as a coach, we want to understand that and put an environment in place with drills and constraints to allow the athlete to adapt to that for the change that we're wanting to make. So it's holistic. We've got to get quite creative with it. We've got to be agile, and more importantly, we've got to be present with the athlete and coach what we're seeing in front of us. It can't be rigid. So develop your technical model, have a high intensity framework on if an athlete is coming from an operation, what starting level 0 would be on the wall, perhaps, and then have a framework criteria that takes them all the way through to level 5, which would be high reactivity, high chaos, and maximum speed. We want to have that in place, but know that it's not linear. Know that it's a process that each individual will be in a different spot on each given day. So where an athlete was 2 days ago, they might be in a level 2, and that's where they're at that day, and that's where their coordination was at, and their neuromuscular control. But in a couple of days' time, you might find that you're able to take them level 5. Because your coaching was more effective, you understand where the athlete's at, and their ability to execute those drills through familiarization, but also maybe they just had a better night's sleep, was far greater that day, and you want to maximize that. So that's where keeping your own mind is critical. And that's my final note on that. Also a good one to look at as well, and something that I think will help with injury mitigation, is once we've got all this information and we understand the athlete's bias and the way they move with that James Wild quadrant, it could be a good opportunity to use that to flag when athletes are at risk. So for those boundy-based, air-based athletes, knowing that they're probably using their ankle complex and there's high forces going through the ankle complex, when they're doing more high volume weeks, perhaps understanding what their knee to wall is like, what their seated calf isometric tests are, what's their calf strength, having higher thresholds for those athletes, because we know that they use that. There's a lot higher force going through the ankle complex, and we want to be a little bit more agile with their load management from a volume perspective to reduce things like Achilles and calves. Equally with our overstriders, heavy backside mechanics, and those athletes that over push, we want to make sure that we're monitoring their high speed exposures, their sprinting exposures, and maybe when their NordBoard scores, that we need to have higher NordBoard thresholds, higher RDL thresholds, because we know that the way they move puts higher strain on their hamstrings and puts them at risk for hamstring strain. So I think that's an interesting take, and we recently had James on, understanding how an athlete moves from a performance perspective, but also injury, and maybe making some proactive decisions around load management for those athletes if you're seeing a few flags and you know that the upcoming session is going to be quite demanding in volume or in high intensity actions, perhaps you might make some load modifications. And equally for developing robustness, know that chronic exposure for those athletes will be really important. So keeping volume in and keeping their elastic qualities up for the boundy guys, as well as for the over pushers, making sure that their hamstring strength is strong across the year and their exposure to high speed is consistent. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you took some takeaways from this, and ultimately there's a few people out there that will start refining their technical model. I know it's something that I'm always working on refining, both from a reconditioning point of view as well as main group management with improving athlete speed. If it's something that you have any follow-up questions with or queries, feel free to reach out on social media or email me at jack@prevalentpro.com. Thanks, guys. I'll see you on the next episode.